Good morning. Canadians are beyond frustrated. Other countries are reopening. Others are being spared from some of the serious risks of this third wave. Last spring, when it was clear that vaccines would be the key tool to turn the page in this crisis, Mr. Trudeau dropped the ball completely. He turned to the communist Chinese regime for a vaccine, and that failed. He failed to secure domestic production and failed to negotiate early delivery. Cette situation est inacceptable au Canada, notamment pour un pays de G7. Cela n'aurait pas dû se passer ainsi. Nous sommes ici car la réponse des libéraux a été lente at chaque étape. We are here because the Liberal response at every stage has been slow and confused. We are still scrambling to catch up. The Liberal government did not deliver adequate vaccine supply in January and February of this year. Now, only 2.7% of Canadians are fully vaccinated. According to federal government modelling, Canadians cannot expect to begin to reopen until at least 20% of Canadians are fully vaccinated, and 75% have received at least one dose. But the supply of vaccines we are receiving is insufficient to reach this goal before many provinces are scheduled to begin lifting their restrictions. The Prime Minister's failure to secure sufficient vaccine supply led the government to ignore the direction of the vaccine manufacturers and order a 4-month wait time between doses, longer than any other country in the world. We also have no national system of screening and rapid testing that will be critical for a faster, safe reopening. This is perhaps the Prime Minister's greatest failure because he promised this system a year ago. On this current trajectory, Canadians will be facing increased restrictions and lockdowns in multiple provinces, and we will not see restrictions lift in time for summer. Si nous continuons sur cette voie, avec une pénurie de vaccins et de tests de dépistage rapides, les Canadiens vont devoir faire face à des restrictions plus sévères, même à une hausse des fermetures dans plusieurs provinces. De plus, les restrictions vont être encore là cet été. Today, Canada's Conservatives are calling on the government to ensure that every Canadian adult has access to a vaccine by the May long weekend, and that national standards are applied for screening and testing, along with a national supply of the tests. The provinces and health authorities have been clear that they have the capacity to administer more vaccines. They have the demand for those vaccines. What is missing is the supply. Canadians are frustrated. They want to get back to work. They want to go back to school. They want to visit their loved ones again. And they want to know that they are safe. The only way to achieve this is to secure more vaccines and distribute them immediately to ensure that every Canadian adult can have access to a vaccine by the May long weekend. And the other critical tool for our safe and swift reopening is to have a consistent and reliable screening and rapid testing system from coast to coast to coast. By the third wave, it is unacceptable that Mr. Trudeau has not delivered promises he made from the first wave. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
And now we'll be taking questions, starting with questions on the phone, and alternate between the room and the phone to sanitize the mic between questions. Quick reminder, as usual, one question and one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone et alternant les questions de la salle et au téléphone pour bien désinfecter le micro entre les questions. Petit rappel, une question avec une question de suivi. Today, Mr. O'Toole will take 8 questions. Aujourd'hui, M. O'Toole prendra 8 questions. Operator, do we have the first question?
First question, première question. Estelle Côté, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. J'aimerais vous faire commenter d'abord concernant les inconduites dans l'armée. Si on avait un nouveau mécanisme pour gérer les inconduites dans l'armée, quel devrait être son niveau d'indépendance? Est-ce qu'on devrait se rapporter au ministre, au premier ministre ou à la Chambre? Est-ce que ce serait suffisant finalement? Qu'est-ce qui serait suffisant?
Il y a 2 mois, j'ai proposé quelques mesures d'arrêter la situation dans les forces armées canadiennes. Premièrement, une enquête indépendante sur les allégations d'inconduite sexuelle dans les forces armées et un processus pour le Parlement, pour rapporter au Parlement. Deuxièmement, on doit avoir un gel pour les promotions des générales et admirals parce qu'il y a une crise de confiance dans les forces armées canadiennes maintenant et on doit corriger la situation. Je suis très déçu par l'approche du Premier ministre Trudeau avec un camouflage dans son bureau avec les allégations il y a 3 ans. Les Canadiennes en uniforme méritent mieux.
Une autre question pour vous, M. O'Toole. Est-ce qu'il est encore possible de regagner la confiance des militaires à l'égard d'un système de plainte après tout ce qui s'est passé, tout ce qu'on a entendu?
Oui, je pense que c'est possible et c'est pourquoi on doit agir très vite sur la situation. Malheureusement, M. Trudeau, son bureau ont reçu une plainte il y a 3 ans sur une allégation contre le général Vance, en pleine d'une campagne contre l'harcèlement sexuel dans les forces armées. C'était inacceptable d'ignorer un plan, d'avoir un camouflage entre le bureau du ministre de Défense nationale et sa chef de cabinet de M. Trudeau, Mme Telford. C'est inacceptable. Les Canadiens en uniforme méritent mieux.
Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle. We'll take the next question from the room.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Just want to get your thoughts on, what would you do with the recommendation of, 4 months, this strategy right now of delaying the second dose by as much as 4 months? Would if you were leader of the country, would you have followed that advice? Would you have encouraged another option? What do you think about that current strategy?
Well, first, Kevin, I would never have let the country get in this place. I never in 100 years would have partnered with Communist China for a vaccine solution for Canadians. We would have built domestic capacity, something I was urging 1 year ago, and Mr. Trudeau fumbled the ball completely. We need to listen to the science, to the pharmaceutical companies designing and developing these critical vaccines. Mr. Trudeau has ignored his own chief science officer. He has ignored the manufacturers of the vaccines when he's stretched the dosing cycle to such an extreme limit. It's off-label usage in many ways, and that's only happening because he failed to deliver adequate doses in January and February. We're demanding better now that the United States has millions of doses in storage. The President was talking yesterday about using those with friends. We are the closest and longest ally of the United States. We should urge the President quickly to help us catch up because Mr. Trudeau has failed.
Your request today to have every adult in Canada to get a shot before May long weekend, would that not also put more strain on the rollout, making it more likely that there'll be a greater delay between your first and second dose, given the current supply situation? And I just want to, you said that Mr. Trudeau didn't listen to his science advisor. We do know that, NACI had recommended this 4-month delay. They say that's based on science. So I just want to be specific. What are you talking about when you say that Mr. Trudeau didn't listen to the scientists?
The Prime Minister appointed a chief science advisor for the country, and she has questioned this decision. Mr. Trudeau talks a good game on many things, including science, but doesn't follow it when the chips are down. We have the ability to work with our allies and with countries that were better prepared than Mr. Trudeau, that are reaching or closing in on herd immunity, to start having faster access to pharmaceutical supplies. The United States has millions of doses in storage. We've seen a premier in Manitoba actually negotiate an arrangement with a state, North Dakota. We've seen no leadership from the Prime Minister. So we're urging him to secure faster access to those vaccines, and we're asking for a national approach to screening and rapid testing. That is a critical system we're going to need in place for a swift and safe reopening.
Operator, next question. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Reminder to press star 1 if you have questions. Appuyez sur l'étoile et le 1 si vous avez des questions. Next question is from Amanda Connolly, Global News.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Can you hear me okay, first of all?
Good morning, Amanda.
Wonderful. Documents obtained by Global News and verified by the Department of National Defense show military police did not make their recommendation to shut down the investigation into General Jonathan Vance until the same day he was sworn in as Chief of the Defense Staff, and it wasn't officially shut down until 4 days later. You said the Liberal government failed women in the military by not investigating Vance in 2018, but the government that you were part of proceeded with the appointment of a man who we now know was still the subject of an open military police investigation. Does the Conservative Party share responsibility for failing women in the military?
No, as I've said, Amanda, when I heard a rumor, I made sure that that was investigated immediately. When Mr. Trudeau's minister and chief of staff were made aware of direct allegations from a victim, they covered it up. And so Canadians deserve action, they deserve transparency, and they deserve Mr. Trudeau to hold to account the people who clearly kept this critical information from him and conducted a cover-up without the Prime Minister knowing, or at least that's what he says.
I'd like to get your response, though, to the fact that that investigation was open when Vance was appointed. And also, to follow up here, your party had a motion on notice for today that would have called on the government to launch a public inquiry into military sexual conduct. Why did you decide not to pursue that?
Well, as you know, Amanda, our various work at committees is also continuing to examine these serious allegations and the cover-up by Mr. Trudeau's office and Minister Sajan's office. I know there will be an opportunity tomorrow for the National Defence Committee to examine this and to ask Ms. Telford to come testify, to come clarify why she decided to let her assistant know about the situation and the allegations against General Vance, but she didn't tell the Prime Minister. That is deeply troubling, and I know the committee will explore that tomorrow, and that gives the House opportunity to visit in the future.
We will take the next question from the floor. Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Chris Reynolds with Canadian Press. What did you know about former Defence Chief Jonathan Vance's relationship with a subordinate during your time as Veterans Affairs Minister? And also, I'm curious how the Tories can criticize the Liberals on their handling of the Vance allegations, given the Conservatives' own record on how they handled allegations against him before he was named CDS.
That's an important question. There were no allegations. I heard a rumor that I wanted investigated, particularly after the Deschamps report. I wanted an inappropriate relationship that I heard a rumor about to be investigated, and it was. Mr. Trudeau, his minister, his chief of staff were aware of a direct complaint and allegation from a victim who brought it forward to the ombudsman to have it raised with the minister. They did nothing for 3 years. That failed that woman and sent a signal that they were willing to cover up an examination in the midst of Operation Honor. I think it's completely unacceptable, and it shows a culture of cover-up and corruption with the Trudeau government.
I'm also curious what you think Canada should do in the way of going about getting way more vaccines by the end of the month. How it can exactly ramp this effort up further? And also, I'm curious if Canada should open the U.S. border to get more Canadians a shot. Is that one tool?
Well, yesterday, President Biden talked about the arsenal of vaccines that the United States has on reserve that could be used for allies and friends. We are their NORAD, NATO, long-standing neighbors, allies, trade partners. Our economies are directly integrated. We need the Prime Minister to fight for those vaccines so that we can help move past this health crisis and economic crisis and catch up to countries like the United States that had plans that were ready and did not fail, like Mr. Trudeau. So there are doses available. Let's have some urgency. Let's lead, Prime Minister. So that's why we're bringing this motion today. And we also need the rapid test that he promised on his doorstep a year ago. We need a national system and standards for screening and testing.
Operator, next question. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Ray Filion, TVA.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Qu'est-ce que vous aviez entendu comme rumeur au sujet du général Vance et à quel moment?
J'ai reçu seulement une rumeur sur une relation et j'ai demandé à mon chef de cabinet d'examiner ça. Il y a une grande différence entre ça et des allégations, un plan direct par une victime et après ça, pas d'action pour 3 ans par le bureau de M. Trudeau et le ministre de la Défense nationale.
Est-ce qu'un système indépendant de la police militaire pour enquêter sur des allégations de harcèlement sexuel sera suffisant selon vous ou ça prend autre chose?
Autre chose, Raymond, il y a 2 mois, j'ai proposé une enquête indépendante d'examiner toutes les allégations et la culture dans les forces armées canadiennes et en même temps d'avoir un gel pour les promotions des générales et admirals dans les forces armées parce qu'il y a une crise de confiance maintenant pour les hommes et femmes en uniforme, mais pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes. On doit restaurer la confiance de notre pays dans les forces armées parce que c'est une institution importante.
We will take the next question from the floor. Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Stephanie Levitz with the Toronto Star. To continue on about questions about General Jonathan Vance, there's a member of your caucus, Pierre Poilievre, who has a long-standing relationship with one of the women, and I don't mean to use the word relationship in that context, but has known one of the women who levied allegations against the general for quite some time. He used her as part of pitches on campaign issues. And so I'm wondering if you've had any discussions with Pierre about whether this woman ever disclosed the allegations about General Jonathan Vance to him and whether he did or didn't decide to take any action about that.
No, I have not.
And just to follow up on a different subject, I wanted to ask you about the question of paid sick leave in Ontario and the decision by the Ford government to go ahead. Where do you come down on this? Is it the role of the federal government in this particular instance to step in if provinces aren't delivering what science advisors say is necessary, or is it up to provinces and businesses to figure this out?
I've been saying for some time, this is an area where I think there should be collaboration between both levels of government, the provinces and the federal government. In fact, it's not just been Ontario, it's been British Columbia and others that have looked to see whether there be partnership both on programs but also on the administration of the programs. Mr. Trudeau talks a great game about Team Canada, but he let down Team Canada by not supplying sufficient vaccines to avoid a severe third wave. How can we make sure that there's no workplace transmission? I think benefits like that are a key part of it. And however the federal government can partner, they should be doing that.
Operator, next question. Opérateur, prochaine question.
A reminder to press star 1 if you do have any questions. Appuyez sur l'étoile et le 1 si vous avez des questions. Currently, we have no questions.
We will take the last question from the room. Nous allons prendre la dernière question de la salle.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole, David Thurton, CBC News. Good to see you this morning.
Good to see you, David.
Your motion says the government extended the recommended interval for the second vaccine dose to 4 months against the recommendations of vaccine manufacturers. The government extended the recommended interval. But with all due respect, Mr. O'Toole, this is not what happened. NACI made the recommendation. It was up to the provinces and the territories to decide whether they would follow this decision. So My question to you is, are you comfortable with this inaccuracy?
I would refer you, David, to the Pfizer statement with respect to the direction of use for a vaccine they developed, they hold the intellectual property in, and they supplied to the government in very limited numbers, clearly. Other countries have a better access to supplies, but they have indications for use, which are part of the monograph and the approval of these products. Mr. Trudeau is deviating from the directed use by the manufacturer, not based on science, David, but based on his failure to secure sufficient quantities. His chief science advisor has also questioned this because it is not a recommended use by the manufacturer. NACI themselves acknowledged they were only taking the decision, the very unusual decision they took, because of a shortage of supply. Where does that all come back to? Mr. Trudeau's failure. Why did he partner with a communist Chinese enterprise? Why was he so late to secure contractual supply? Why won't he release those contracts to show clearly the options and timelines? Why didn't he secure domestic capacity? These are all questions the Prime Minister hasn't answered.
But Mr. O'Toole, yes, it would be correct to say that NACI made some of its decisions to extend that interval. These independent doctors who are not part of the government, they're independent doctors. It would be correct to say some of that was based on supply, but some of that recommendation was also based on science, that, extending the dosing interval shows that, there are certain benefits in terms of boosting immunity. So is it correct to say that Trudeau made the decision to extend the dosing interval when clearly you had an independent body of doctors who made this recommendation, and it's up to provinces and territories to follow that decision? Is it accurate to say that, Mr. O'Toole?
Absolutely it is. Having worked in this area in the private sector, the efficacy of a vaccine is only certain based on its indicated use. That is what the manufacturers have said. I respect NACI, and I think they've made decisions based on the scarcity of supply. They've said that themselves using their opinions. There are no clinical peer-reviewed clinical supports for changing the timeline, but they're saying in a crisis, because Mr. Trudeau hasn't delivered, what can we do in a way that we think will extend a level of immunity? So we're in this crisis, David, because of Mr. Trudeau's failure to secure adequate supply, like other countries, like our American neighbors had. So our motion, let's try and work with the Americans to tap that supply. Let's get people vaccinated by May. Let's have rapid screening and testing and a national approach to this so we can have a safe and effective reopening this summer. That is what Conservatives will fight for today.
This is all the time we have. C'est tout le temps que nous avions. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.